Kia ora koutou katoa, and welcome to Sustainable Business Network's latest webinar this lunchtime. Thanks very much for taking the time to join us today. So another day in lockdown here in Auckland. Firstly, our thoughts go out to all those who are most affected by the current restrictions, including our smaller business owners, both within our own business network and obviously beyond. So my name is Phil Jones, and I will be the MC for the webinar this lunchtime over the next hour. Just to give a bit of background first in terms of Sustainable Business Network. So we run projects across the sustainability landscape. Many of you are aware of this, covering waste and circular economy, water, and also climate. So in that work, we collaborate with many organisations to co-create solutions to some of our key sustainability challenges. I personally lead SBN's climate-related work, including our Climate Action 2025 project. And that project aims to help particularly our smaller businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, reduce their carbon footprint and also prepare for the expected impacts from climate change. So that's a multi-year project that we've recently initiated. So I'd like to take an opportunity just to thank our project partners for their support to make this happen. They were on the holding slide that you saw at the beginning. So this is the first of our Climate Action Countdown webinar series. Each month we'll be focusing on an area of climate action, and reducing our emissions from transport is a prime opportunity both for the country and also for our business sector. So that's what we'll talk about today, and delighted we've got Richard, Nick and Steve to share their knowledge on different aspects of electric vehicles and electrifying our transport system. We have the Q&A feature enabled, so please ask questions. We'll have plenty of time at the end to cover off your questions, so please use that feature. And we'll also be running a couple of polls during the session as well to ask you a couple of questions, so look out for those. So to kick things off, I'll quickly share my screen. Just want to give a background to New Zealand's transport system and the kind of carbon emissions challenge we have. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. Yes, so as I say, that's the program for the next hour. You'll be hearing from Richard, Nick and Steve on those different aspects of electric vehicles, and then we'll have your questions answered, hopefully. So transport in New Zealand, the big picture. So in terms of how we travel to work, so before we had this sort of respite during lockdown where unbelievably our roads sometimes look like this, but obviously they normally look like this. Particularly in our peak hours, and more or less the whole day in our major centres. And how we travel to work in particular, we have a very car-dominated transport system. 73%, this is census data, 73% travel to work in private vehicles. This is across, as I say, this is across the nation, probably less in Auckland. So 12% working from home, that's before lockdown. That will likely change the next census if some of these recent trends continue. We obviously love our cars. We basically have a car for every adult in New Zealand. So we've got nearly 4 million light vehicles, and we have one of the highest car ownership rates in the developed world. And it's continuing to rise after a small drop about a decade ago. So we love our cars, and we also love to keep them. We have one of the oldest fleets on average. The average life or the average age of one of our cars is 14 years. So it is well above, equivalent countries, equivalent developed countries. So over 36% are over 15 years old of our 4 million vehicles. So that's quite a challenge as well in terms of transitioning from to electric vehicles. So the impacts, quick run through the impacts. We've got a congestion time impact. This is old data. That'll be a lot more in terms of the average commute time in Auckland. We've got a financial cost, economic cost from congestion. That's estimated at 1.3 billion a couple of years ago. That was just in Auckland. We spend a heap of our hard-earned foreign exchange money buying fuel, close to 8 billion in 2018. And from a health perspective, the emissions from vehicles contribute to an estimated 400 premature deaths per year. So plenty of reasons why we need to address this problem. And of course, carbon emissions from our transport system, that's what we're here for mainly today. 18% roughly of our national emissions are from transport, and most of those are from the road transport sector. And it's been the area of the biggest increase over the last 3 decades. And those emissions are from both our light vehicles, our cars and utes, so that's about 2/3, our heavy vehicle fleet, lorries, buses, etc., and to a lesser degree, our smaller commercial vehicles. So we've got a challenge here, and this highlights the significance of the road transport emissions in our national emissions situation. So on the left here, we've got our agricultural emissions. We know we've got a problem there. But after that, the one that obviously stands out is emissions from road transport. So that is really the prime opportunity, particularly when it's not as straightforward to reduce emissions from agriculture. So where do we need to get to? If we recognise that road transport is a prime opportunity, what we really want to do is by 2050, getting to a point where we're getting close to zero emissions from the road transport sector. Currently, 90% of the energy near 100% of the energy we need for road transport involves emissions, carbon emissions. So obviously, as we increase the number of electric vehicles, that percentage will go down. So what that means, if we think about how long we keep our cars for, and say we want to have an emissions-free roads transport sector by 2050, then say by 2040 we want all of our new vehicles to be EVs or ultra low emission vehicles. This is where we are at the moment. 2.3% of all new vehicle registrations last year were EVs, 2.3% roughly, there or thereabouts. So if we do a straight line to get to that 2040 position, then say we want to, by 2030, 50% of registrations to be electric vehicles or other zero emission vehicles. So that's a bit of context. Hopefully that sets us up nicely for this session. We have a quick poll. So hopefully everyone who's listening can participate in this. I'll quickly share if I can. For some reason I can't. There we go. Quickly share this poll. What type of car vehicle do you own? So please answer that question. We'll give you a wee while to do that. Votes are coming in. 2/3 have completed. I'm guessing everyone's seeing this on the screen. Nearly all there, nearly everyone's voted. That's interesting. Don't own a vehicle, that's pretty high, 20%. Most obviously own a petrol or diesel car. So not a great surprise, but we do have some EV owners out there. So that's great. We've got so many who haven't got experience of EVs that we can, hopefully you'll learn lots today. So I'll end that poll and stop that. And yes, so delighted now to introduce Richard Briggs, who leads the transport portfolio at EECA, who do a lot of work. EECA is the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, the government agency, do a lot of work with electric vehicles. So hand over to you, Richard.
Sorry, thanks, Phil. Good afternoon, everybody. Look, I thought I'd probably take a step back and introduce you to electric vehicles, and in doing so, probably firstly a bit of a disclaimer. They are a great option to reduce emissions, but I suppose we do need to acknowledge that it is not a pure zero emission transport solution. And what I mean by that is that every EV contains embedded emissions from manufacture and are actually higher than what you'd have in a normal car. But what we're finding is that they do break even 12 to 18 months into the life of the vehicle. And of course, that change is due to the additional emissions from the manufacturing of batteries. The good news, though, is that the in-life use can be entirely emissions-free, that if you charge using renewable electricity, and the best opportunity to do so is overnight charging. The final phase, though, is the interesting one, which is being the disposal of batteries. And a lot of people do see that as a major barrier to considering electric vehicles. And typically in a car environment, we're seeing certainly the early batteries are lasting at least 10 years, where battery degradation can reduce the storage capacity by around 40%. That number is normally measured as a state of health or a percentage of the new capacity of a battery. Look, just briefly touching on degradation. Electric vehicle battery packs are just made up of hundreds of little lithium batteries. And when an EV is built, it has a certain capacity, but in use over time, that capacity does slowly reduce. So interestingly, as opposed to a combustion engine car, whereas a buyer, particularly a buyer of a second-hand one, focuses on the odometer, in an EV, it's that state of health is the indicator of wear. And look, at some point, that battery is just no longer fit for purpose. What happens then? And what we are investigating is the second life that's emerging of that. And the most popular opportunity at the moment is a very, very cost-effective battery storage solution for, say, domestic solar generation. And so you can then generate power during the day and use it at night. And even with a battery at 50% state of health, there's probably enough energy in that for domestic use for at least another 10 years. And there's a couple of examples. Renault, who's quite big in Europe with car batteries, they're actually using batteries to back up elevators in Paris. And in America, a lot of them are used for data centers. So they do have quite a useful second life. And so after that, now we're sort of looking at about 20 years, and then the battery can get recycled. And obviously there's some valuable materials that can be extracted from that. We've got several companies here that are working on that technology, but it's such an early stage yet that the supply of used batteries is sort of practically non-existent for that purpose. So we await a supply-demand market balance. Look, just briefly touching on the benefits of an EV, and it's really more than just an emissions play. And I'm an EV owner myself, and I see there's a couple of you there as well, also enjoying it. They're really cheap to run. Give you an example with my Nissan Leaf, it costs me about $300 to travel 10,000 K. The analysis we've done on that suggests that it's the equivalent of buying petrol at about 30 cents a litre. And associated with that, there's no maintenance, and also there's a current incentive until January 2022 of no road user charges, which is just another $600 benefit as well. The cars themselves are quiet ride. There's no clutch, there's no gears, there's no diff, there's no spark plugs, engine oil. Maintenance is negligible in these things. The other challenge that I hear quite often is around the range. The range just isn't there for me to do what I want. So we've undertaken some surveys, and interestingly enough, the average commuting distance in New Zealand is 21 kilometres. And 95% of driving days are under 125 kilometres, and all of those are well within the range of even probably the cheapest second-hand Nissan Leaf. So look, just briefly touching on pricing. Look, second-hand Nissan Leafs start at around $10,000. That'll get you a vehicle with about a 60 to 70% state of health battery. New ones are around about $60,000 and up. That'll get you a Nissan Leaf that gives you 250k range, and I think for a couple of grand more, you'll get the Ioniq that's got a 370k range. But you know, what that does show is clearly electric cars are currently far more expensive to buy new than fuel cars. But what you do need to take into account those operating costs being a factor of 8 to 10 times less. So I think it's quite important doing the financials that you do look at the whole of life costs when you are comparing those investments. And I think today the gap is still very, very significant between a new car and a new battery, but battery prices are falling very rapidly. And it's, you know, certainly it's going to be cheaper for manufacturers to build electric cars when the volumes start to come in the next couple of years. And analysts such as Bloomberg are predicting price parity anywhere from around about 2023 to 2025. And also, while only 10 models exist today in our market, all of the big players have battery electric vehicle plans for their next model. And that includes utes and commercial vehicles. One vehicle that's probably worth noting is the new Volkswagen ID3 range, which I think will probably help completely transform the market over the next 2 to 3 years. So look, that's just a very brief introduction to electric vehicles. There's so much more that we could cover off, but certainly time is an issue, and happy to take some questions at the end of the session. But meanwhile, back to you, Phil.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Richard. Yeah, no, the really good summary. Hopefully, yeah, plenty to think about for those who've joined. And yeah, keen to get any questions on what Richard covered there. So now I'd like to introduce Nick Robilliard from Meridian. Nick is the procurement and property manager, and he's been responsible for implementing electric vehicles into the Meridian fleet. So Nick, welcome.
Kia ora. Thank you, Phil. Great to be with you all today, and thanks for being on the call. Yeah, we're into kind of that year 4 into this journey to electric. High level, we will reach by the end of this calendar year 100% of our passenger fleet being fully electric. So there's no PHEVs or even hybrids there. That's fully electric vehicles. So that's a really great milestone. We're looking forward to sharing and communicating, and we're certainly got about a third of our commercial fleets, I think vans and utes, we'd like to be by mid next year, setting ourselves a goal of 2025 to be fully electrified in a vehicle fleet that's sitting around about 170 vehicles. So a big chunk of those are utes, which is challenging. So, and that speaks to, you know, what are some of the challenges into introducing electric vehicles into your fleet. And what does that look like? Because it feels like an apple tree is the best way to describe it. This is the low-hanging fruit at the start, and the further you get up, the harder it gets at times. And so we can, you know, really happy to share a little bit on that today. I'll do a quick screen share. There's not too much in terms of slide content, but I'll share these with you guys. Might be just a moment. Okay, there we go, and share. If you're introducing electric vehicles into your fleet, one of the big things I'm always mindful of is what does your organisation do? What's its DNA, and what does it produce? And does that inherently immediately make it difficult or more challenging or actually quite easy? And we're lucky because we produce renewable energy, and so it was already part of our strategy as a business and DNA to do this. But not every business is like that. You might be someone who does construction and civil, and you're like, well, we just run big trucks. And you might have a culture that has just got more to get there in terms of that. So that is fundamentally a really interesting piece when you think about introducing electric vehicles. You're always mindful of, okay, well, what is my organisation? What is its strategy? And what do our people do and think, and what do we produce? Because that will definitely give you a great starting point as to, you know, whether you've got obviously the execs backing and you've got fundamentally a culture that says, hey, we want to shift to a low emissions economy. So we'll jump straight into, let's see if it lets me do that, might be a second, into my next slide, into the ingredients in a second. And if you are introducing electric vehicles into your fleet, the first thing I look at is probably the two here, electric and shared, is the most interesting one of this little piece. So one of the great ways is, of course, you can try before you buy by just using car share or other forms of even rental, to be fair. Even some of the rental car companies have them. Great way to introduce electric into your fleet is on-demand services. And so I'd encourage anybody who's thinking about that to use those mechanisms, be those the Mevo and Zilch car share schemes, which are in Wellington, Christchurch and Auckland, and even some of the rental car companies have them as a mechanism to get people into the idea of what electric looks like for them. So they're a really easy way because, of course, there's no capital. You just pay a daily rate or an hourly rate, right? So that's a really cool way to do it. But just come back to the ingredients, you know, the people, culture, values, and who your business is, these kind of top at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock here are the fundamental ingredients that I find makes a big difference is to, you know, getting off and springboarding off. And if you're lucky enough to have that, that's fantastic, because then you can actually start going straight into the detail, which is, does our profile of running vehicles actually match, you know, the vehicle's capabilities? And obviously, you know, Richard just shared that, you know, that's obviously moving quite quickly in terms of vehicle range at the moment. And the minimum that I will put into my fleet today as a range piece would be, I think Ionic's got 320k. We're putting a Leaf Plus imported from Japan. So we start at 350k now. We've kind of moved on from 250, really need to be 350 plus, in my opinion, or 320 at least, because we run long distance journeys as well as a short distance. But GPS data is the key to enable you to go, what is possible? How many trips am I doing? How many per day? How many on an average distance journey? How many vehicles are out at given one time? And does that mean I've actually got more cars than I need? Great. I could sell a few of those and reinvest that money back into obviously more expensive EVs. So this was the key for us to succeed. If you're introducing EVs into your fleet, you need GPS data. Well, I would highly recommend you have GPS data. It really unlocks the opportunity because it tells you actually what is happening on the ground, not what the people driving them tell you, because it's invariably not that accurate, is what I found. Not even intentionally that way, just even unintentionally. The market intel, you just got a bit of a brief, you know, there from Richard Meeker, and interesting market. And for this market, we've actually leaned heavily on a combination of nearly new used imported vehicles in Japan, because I can get a better specification for some of those vehicles like Leaf Plus. We are pulling parallel imported vehicles out of the UK because I can get the same product considerably cheaper than I can out of New Zealand dealerships. So one of the ways we've solved some of that capital piece is actually just be a bit more innovative as to what you're buying. And if you're not, I guess I'll use the word hamstrung by having to purchase directly through all of government, then you've got some other mechanisms there that can give you a better vehicle with more range for less money. And so that's how we've managed to do that. So knowing your market really well, and knowing, you know, what these vehicles cost, but also what they sell for, and I can share a little bit in a second, really helps you build the case to obviously introducing electric vehicles into your fleet. And then, of course, it's about stakeholders and who owns the budgets. Ideally, you do. If you don't, it's going to be challenging. And have you got someone in your exec team that's going to fundamentally sponsor this and drive it through? If you haven't, then, you know, it can be really challenging. So we had our CFO. So my case had to go to the numbers person to make it work. So, you know, that makes it equally challenging, but also equally rewarding when you can talk to a transition that was financial decisions that we know we spent no more money than we normally would have on vehicles. And I can say to shareholders, actually, we haven't just spent money buying electric vehicles. We've made this financial proposition stack up. And with that comes the great benefits that you can speak around and socialize around, obviously the environmental impacts, you know, carbon emissions reduction, and actually speak to it in your audited reports, because we're audited in terms of our carbon emissions inventory and how we declare it in our annual report. And it's annual reporting day today, so I've got to be on the hook. Then it's just about knowing X plus Y is, what is the formula when you're introducing electric vehicles into the fleet for your company, your organization? Keeping in mind who your people, culture, values are, what you know from how your fleet operates, what you can buy and who holds the budget, who's backing you, what is the formula that's going to create success, and ultimately user experience, this last little purple box, hugely important to the success of introducing electric vehicles is the user experience has to be good. So knowing who your champions are to get out there first and try and have the fun, having good charging experiences and good charging hardware to support it, supported by stuff that Steve West has, you know, a great network around New Zealand. Great materials, online vids, time for the staff to get into the cars and use them at a lunchtime and actually get a feel for what this is like. User experience is king in terms of transitioning your people to electric vehicles. Don't underestimate the good amount of investment you put in there will help with the success of deployment. So they're the kind of the pieces I'd always be thinking about if I was introducing vehicles into my fleet. Do the numbers stack up? That's one of those big questions Richard mentioned before. What we have found is that the residual value of the vehicles is the difference when you're thinking about a whole of cost life cycle of a vehicle. So the operating cost savings that we make, you do make for having an EV, are the cream on the top. The actual breaker is the fact that we're getting such good residual values on those hardly used, 2-3-year-old EVs, low mileage, that are being just gobbled up by this market because obviously there's not a lot of vehicles and a lot of volume. So that is the piece that makes your TCO work. 92% in year 1, 87% in year 2, and more than 80% in year 3 for products like Ionic as an example. And my Tesla Model 3s, I could sell them for more than I bought them for. Within the first 3 months, people want to buy them off me. So the residual values are the piece that makes this financial proposition stack up if you are purchasing and owning your vehicles, which I would say is significantly easier to make work than leasing. And I'll put that to the side, but I don't think leasing makes it very easy at the moment. And I don't think our lease companies are being overly helpful for that, if I'm being straight. But that's for them to work through. So yes, the numbers do absolutely stack up. You've got to put out a little more capital, but you can be smart about where you buy them from and not have to spend silly money. And you're going to get a good number at the back end. And what is, of course, is the operational cost is, very, very low. So yes, they do stack up. And I can share some more. Someone obviously wants some more information and numbers around that. Finally, one of the operational challenges, charging, and Steve West is going to talk about that. They're obviously doing a great job of deploying a great DC network around New Zealand. That needs to be supported by a great AC network, be that at your office or even in the public areas. And so you really need to have your facilities and property team well on board to make sure that you're not left with vehicles turning up and no good way of charging them, because origin and destination charging is hugely important to the success of introducing and operating an effective electric vehicle fleet, supported by good DC charging, which obviously ChargeNet are building more and more every day, a fantastic network. So charging is often forgotten. It's a difficult one because it involves property, landlords, leases, digging up concrete. Steve can tell you all the great stories about this. He's probably got a million of them. I've got plenty as well. You need to have that one really well considered up front. One of the interesting operational challenges I'd say is there. I'd throw this in there. And of course, it's not just vehicles. It can be marine vessels too. Quite a bit happening if you look on social media on this one. And we're pretty close to a pretty full feasibility study on making electric ferry now possible on Lake Manapouri, which is a World Heritage Site, of course. And we're looking at ways that we can introduce a fully electrified high-speed ferry and help support the growth of this marine industry in New Zealand. So mobility, it also extends to ferries in our case. So we're going to look to try and do that in the next 3 years. I would say less than that, and also do it faster, so high speed, and with more sailings, and with just as good resiliency as we have with a typical diesel, aluminium kind of marine vessel. So mobility can go beyond the vehicle. That's it for me. I'll stop sharing for now. Thank you so much, and obviously I'll look forward to your questions later in the session.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Nick. Yeah, exciting about the EV ferry. I know we've got EV Maritime in Auckland who are trying to introduce electric ferries on the Hauraki Gulf. So yeah, another exciting opportunity. So yes, you've mentioned Steve, wonderful introduction. So Steve West founded ChargeNet. They have the largest, well, they basically introduced the concept of DC fast charging into New Zealand. been hugely influential in, accelerating the uptake of EVs. So welcome, Steve. Over to you.
Thanks, Phil. Good afternoon, everyone. So I am Steve West, the founder and CEO of ChargeNet. I will start my presentation. Screen share. And hopefully you guys can all see that. So ChargeNet was founded 5 years ago, and basically out of frustration. I had imported the very first Tesla Model S into New Zealand in late 2014, and we went on a road trip to show off the car and all of its capabilities to the population of New Zealand. And it was easily doable because, of course, electric cars can be charged anywhere you like. You can plug them into household sockets or three-phase power if you can get it. But it meant that we kind of had to beg, borrow and steal power to travel the length of the country. And it was really clear that that was not going to be a scalable way for the country to adopt electric vehicles, that we had to have public charging. It had to be ubiquitous. It had to be available 24/7. You couldn't have to, you weren't going to, it wasn't going to be practical for people to just knock on doors and call in favors. It really had to be there and available. And since no one else was doing it, then we decided to found a company, and that's what we did. So that's, that was kind of maybe the impetus for us to start ChargeNet. But of course, there are so many other reasons for New Zealand to adopt electric vehicles, as has been discussed already. We have such a high percentage of renewable generation, and we are so far from the rest of the world that fossil fuels are relatively expensive here. Electricity is relatively cheap here, and it's very, very clean. And so the cost savings of using electricity as a fuel are just immense. You talking about a factor of at least 4-to-1, 5-to-1, 8-to-1, depends on how cheap you can get your electricity, but it's still way, way cheaper than petrol, and certainly you make a huge savings on the fuel side. And the big question, I suppose, for any business is whether that then offsets the higher upfront cost. The great thing is, though, that as the technology improves, the batteries become more capable and more cheap to manufacture, that we're rapidly approaching a break-even point where it's actually the same price to buy an EV upfront as it would be to buy an internal combustion vehicle. We're not quite there yet, but give it a year or two and we'll be there. So I'll talk a bit about charging. There's different styles of charging depending on where you find yourself. And in New Zealand, of course, the majority of charging is actually done at home, and that makes sense because we are a nation of garage owners. We have a lot of off-street parking for the most part. And so that makes it very straightforward to just plug your car into a 3-pin socket and charge it up overnight. More and more workplaces are incorporating charging, and destinations like hotels are adding in charging facilities as well. And probably the most visible aspect of ChargeNet that people would be familiar with is our en route charging. So the charging stations that we have out in public, along highways, or en route from one location to another. And those are the most rapid chargers. And naturally, you want to match the charging speed that you use to the location. So if the dwell time is the important factor. If your vehicle is sitting in your garage for 12 hours, then you don't need to charge it in 20 minutes. You can spread that charging out and do it much more economically. Conversely, the public service we offer is rapid charging, and so that means using very expensive equipment to deliver a very fast charging experience. So collaboration is something I wanted to touch on because we couldn't possibly have done what we have done without the help of so many partners. It's just not possible to do this without the help of the lines companies, without the help of the various hosts, and of course with the help of EECA, who've been fantastic with the Low Emission Vehicle Contestable Fund. And you know, coincidentally today they announced the results of round 8, which included funding for 4 hypercharger locations. So at Kaiwaka, Smales Farm in on the North Shore of Auckland, in Bulls, and in Christchurch. So that's a, you know, that's a fantastic result, and we look forward to getting those chargers in the ground. Touch a little bit on the past, which of course back in August of 2015, there was one rapid charger in the entire country. Contrast that with today, 5 years later, and there's hundreds, literally hundreds of rapid chargers. So we've really come far, it has to be said. There's a bit of a timeline here of a few notable events. I don't want to dwell on it, but it's just really pointing out that New Zealand is punching above its weight, that we really have achieved an enormous amount of growth in our infrastructure in an incredibly short space of time. And hopefully it is having the effect that it was intended to, of removing that barrier to electric vehicle uptake. The most exciting thing, of course, is that we just installed our first 300 kilowatt charging site. And you might wonder, okay, what does that mean? And here's a slide that very basically breaks down the difference between AC and DC charging. I won't go into it here, we don't have time, but the long story short is DC charging is much, much, much faster than you would get at home. There's another slide here talking about the different levels of charging speed, and the exciting one really is that rightmost column, the hypercharging. What that's enabling now is charging in as little as 15 minutes if you have a vehicle that's capable of doing so. The vehicle batteries are the key component. They need to be able to accept that level of power to really charge that quickly. And those are the chargers. That is literally a photograph of the Bombay site. We have 2 units there. Each of them delivers 300 kilowatts into 4 CCS cables, and also has charging for 2 CHAdeMO vehicles at the same time. So we can charge up to 6 vehicles at once, and any one of those vehicles can get up to 300 kilowatts. Using the network is super simple. It's really just plug and play. You can read more about that on our website, but it's really as simple as just plug in and tap your fob and push go. That's another picture of the charger site at Bombay, and this is really the end goal though. What we're wanting to do, what we would like to do, is install these hyperchargers all over New Zealand. And so this gives you an idea of the kind of scale that we're working towards. We want you to be able to drive anywhere in New Zealand, and with the right kind of car, charge up in 15 minutes. And at that point, you're talking about something much more like a petrol station experience. Just drive in, charge up, and drive out. Super quick. The future is all about the vehicles. And this is a slide from the Bloomberg New Energy Fund, where they've tried to capture the range of vehicles that are coming and their charging speeds. And what's really apparent is a trend that the newer vehicles are enabling higher power charging, which is going to get you that much, much quicker charging time, 15 to 20 minutes from a very low state of charge to nearly full. And time for questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Steve. Cool. Now, before we answer, or we ask the panelists to answer some of your questions, we just wanted to ask one of you, Let me get this up. Hopefully what you're seeing is polling question number 2. Yeah, what is stopping you or isn't stopping you buying an EV as your next vehicle? Hopefully everyone can see that. There we go. Polls launched. Please let us know. Oh, that's looking good so far. Still trickling through. Just allow a few more minutes or a few more seconds. Nearly everyone's voted, I think. Seems to have slowed down. So a bit of a mix there. Obviously, purchase cost is an issue. Less so charging. Yeah, interesting. But a good number who have made the commitment that their next vehicle will be an EV. So very good. Wonderful. So if we can have all the panelists on the screen, hopefully that works. Good stuff. Yes. Thanks, Richards. Cool. Thanks, guys. So we've had a few questions through. So let me start with one of those. Richard, this is possibly one for you. Yeah, what are the levers that you think are needed to accelerate the shift we need from, combustion to electric vehicles? What are the key things that, EECA sees as priority?
So probably just another disclaimer, because we're good at those. I think shifting 4.5 million cars to 4.5 million EVs isn't the answer. And certainly one of the things we're very, very keen to work with fleets on is optimization. And Nick touched on it. And, once you've got your telemetry, you can actually work out what vehicles are actually doing what. And certainly what we found with bigger fleets is there's a huge optimization opportunity, alternative transport modes, other ways of doing business. And the fleet can be reduced. When the fleet's reduced, your cost of migrating your fleet is obviously considerably less as well. But from an EECA point of view, the current lever we've got is the Low Emission Vehicle Contestable Fund that both Nick and Steve have mentioned. And that's really there to help accelerate the uptake. It talks about demonstrating potential, helping with business cases, overcoming barriers, demonstrating proof of concept, that type of thing. It's not a subsidy fund, it's definitely a proof of concept fund. And a good example of success there was New Zealand Post came to us in an earlier round saying, look, can we test whether vans can work in a courier environment? So we funded 5 vehicles. They went away and tested it. And I think the CEO announced only a couple of weeks ago that they are now going to subsidise any courier driver that wishes to buy a van to help New Zealand Post be carbon neutral. Classic success story and really a good demonstration of what that fund exists to do. The other things we're looking at as well, there was a lot of noise early in the year about the fee-bait scheme. And I think it's recognised in the current pricing differential that there needs to be some form of financial incentive, at least until we're getting closer to price parity. I'm quite confident that'll get revisited by the next government and hopefully resurrected. The other one that's quite popular, and we're also supportive of it, is that this distortion we've got at the moment with the fringe benefit tax exemption on utes. Clearly you can see what that has achieved. That lever is quite powerful. And if that same lever was applied to electric vehicles, then I think you'd probably start seeing that shift that that question raises. One thing the government are also doing, we're working as a lead agency on looking at accelerating the uptake of the government fleet. That does two things. One is it's providing a little bit of leadership, but it's creating awareness amongst the community of the potential. And also, we're conscious that New Zealand is a used car market, and the availability of used cars is scarce at the moment. And Nick pointed out that his residual values are benefiting from that. But one of the things, by accelerating the uptake in the government fleet, and there's 15,000 odd vehicles in the fleet, that's creating a pool of second-hand cars, 2 to 3 years down the track, which again is going to help with that wholesale migration.
Great, thanks, Richard. Yes, optimization of fleets are really important, and one of the things that we're keen within SBN is to champion car sharing, and we've got a number of car sharing operators in our network. Zilch, Mevo, City Hop, they all have, well, Zilch is purely EV, so that's a really good option, particularly for people who live in cities. So let's see, there's a, yes, Steve, probably one for you. In terms of these hyperchargers,
Yes.
Your graphic showed, what vehicles can take those high power sources. Which are the ones that are available in New Zealand, and kind of what are the cost of those? How realistic is it to be able to utilize that level of charge?
Yeah. So it depends where you draw the line. If you say anything that charges faster than 50 kilowatts, well, then you're starting with vehicles like the Ioniq and the Kona, both of which can charge from Hyundai, that will charge at 75 kilowatts. Moving up the power, you've got Mercedes have a vehicle, the EECA, which does 100 kilowatt charging. Audi e-tron does 150. Jaguar I-Pace does also about 150. The Tesla Model 3 is, as far as EVs go, I guess is relatively affordable. It's certainly cheaper than the Model S. And it, on those 300 kilowatt chargers, will approach 200 kilowatts of charging speed, which will get them from virtually empty to 80% in 25 minutes. So the really high end, though, you're looking at the Porsche Taycan, which is, I don't even know what they cost, 400 grand. They're like silly expensive, but they are, right up there as the highest level of technology. And so they will do a charge of that similar range to 80% in 20 minutes. So that's peaking at 265 kilowatts. So the vehicles actually don't even exist yet that can fully take advantage of that level of charging speed, but they are definitely coming. It all comes down to battery chemistry and the very gradual and improvements there that allow those batteries to take more and more power and charge in a shorter and shorter time. And Tesla are definitely doing a lot of research to both increase the charging power, but also improve the longevity of the batteries and bring down the cost. And so that's one of those very difficult, pick two of those three. And one of all three. I guess,
one of the concerns about fast charging has been potential effect on battery health. So I guess that's a key consideration in that technical development.
Yeah, and that's primarily related to temperature. So the studies of aging in batteries have almost universally found that it's a function of how hot the batteries get. And the key then is to have the active cooling system in the vehicle that maintains that battery temperature. It's sort of unfortunate that the really most affordable EVs don't have any kind of active cooling, so you wouldn't want to do more than 1 or 2 rapid charges on them in a day, whereas the Teslas and the like have liquid cooling, and you can just hammer them over and over again, no problem.
Cool. I'm keeping in touch with that, the price point of different EVs, and Richard, you mentioned about the Ute challenge in terms of FBT, but also in terms of, and Nick, you mentioned it, availability of EV utes. Yeah, how close are we to kind of 50k EV ute? That's a question we've had from one of our Facebook.
Well, LDV T60 should be out, I understand, maybe later next year. I don't think it'll be less than $50,000. If you said less than 60, maybe. I mean, their EV80 kind of van that you can get in cab and chassis, they originally started in the 70s. I think they've brought them down now to 59. That T60 from LDV might be a reasonable truck, might be reasonably rated from an NCAP safety perspective. We all know that's going to be a showstopper if it's not. And sounds like it's going to be in two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive. If that was the case, you know, it might come in with a 6 in front of it if you're lucky, in my view. So we'll see if that pops. Obviously, there's a few other bits and pieces coming from other manufacturers at the higher end of things. Certainly some signals out of Mitsubishi, Nissan, that they'll share the next platform and maybe create a PHEV version of a ute. That might be one from those kind of group that might pop in the next 2 years. And obviously there's all the other product coming out of the States and other things at the higher end, which question A, whether we get it, B, if it's crash test certified to this market, and obviously if it's anywhere near in reach, it certainly won't be anything close to those numbers. So certainly the Chinese manufacturers seem to be the first, from what I can see, that are going to land something. And the question is, will it have a 5, a 6 or a 7 in front of it? I'll leave it to Steve, Richard and Phil to decide if they think it's which one of those it might be.
Any comments, guys?
Hard to say, isn't it? And also, you know, conscious that the COVID situation has also had quite a significant impact on production and availability of parts and resources, and obviously had an impact on businesses. And so really the next couple of years is really a bit of an unknown from pricing stability point of view.
Cool. Nick, this is one for you as well. So in terms of, you mentioned about, you know, that you're now looking at 300k as a minimum kind of range for any of your fleet vehicles. Is that because of the functional need, or is that partly because of user mindsets? You know, are people not willing to use vehicles with lower range just because of that anxiety thing?
Good question. It's now in those areas of our pool vehicles who legitimately do travel some distance. And what we've found is that, say with a mid-range vehicle, Steve's kindly got plenty of charges between Christchurch and Twizel. But what am I willing to wait for? And then what do I get stuck behind? Because there's about 9, I think, between Christchurch and Twizel if you count them up for all the way. But you can get stuck behind someone at the wrong point, whether it be Geraldine, Tekapo, fairly somewhere around there. And so then you get stuck behind a Kona and you could be there another 40 minutes plus the time you have there. And so, yes, people don't have a propensity to wait that long. And if they do, they're probably better to do 2 quick stops, I've found, as a strategy rather than 1 long stop. And so there is a level of willingness, but I think that ultimately, you know, the acceptance even for the hardiest of our people who do it pretty well is that you need more than that. And certainly when you start going on big trips between Twizel, Dunedin, Invercargill, Queenstown back to Twizel, that's actually a big trip. So we're going to put a VW ID3 in there. It's got 560k range. That actually that fits and works, but I'm only buying one of them because they're damn expensive. So, so yeah, and because the products coming out are at least 320 in the case of the Ioniq, well, that's fantastic because that actually is pretty close. Because you're right, a lot of our trips are certainly less than 300 kilometres, and for many of those that are on the call here today, that's actually fine. So the MG ZS EV, some of the Kia Niro makes a mid-range EV, obviously the new Leaf, the Leaf Plus, the Ioniq, they will all be more than capable from many fleets. In actual fact, if you look at the trip data, it's really only the exception that you start getting in beyond that. And so I'm just trying to make the job a bit easier because we do actually have some reasonable, regular run routes that are 300 kilometres. And so it just gets a bit of a long day, if you know what I mean. If you've been driving 4 hours and then got to wait 40 minutes and then you get stuck behind someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question, because this is very relevant, particularly for the affordable, you know, the Nissan Leaf kind of option. A question here, if I get a Nissan Leaf and want to travel 300 kilometres, what time is required for en route charging? Steve, I'm a Leaf, so I kind of can relate to that experience.
Yeah, that's going to depend very much on what model of Leaf you're talking about. If you have, say your Leaf has a 200-kilometre range, well, then you only need to stop once for charging, and you're going to be there 20 to 30 minutes. So yeah, it'll add a little bit of time to the journey, but not a lot.
Cool. Great. Conscious we're running out of time. I just want a quick last question for each of you to answer. Richard referred to it earlier in terms of, you know, what's your one wish for the next government in terms of a policy to encourage uptake of EVs or accelerate the uptake of EVs? Richard, do you want to go first? I mean, you may have already answered it.
I probably have, but yeah, I do have to be quite careful being a government worker as to what I wish for, but certainly my passion is electric vehicles and the uptake of electric vehicles. I really would like to see you know, the fringe benefit tax consideration. I can see, you know, we can all appreciate what it has done for utes. You know, the top 5 are all utes in the sales statistics. So clearly it's having an influence. And I think if we could have that apply to electric vehicles, I think that would be the game changer.
Cool. Steve?
I would say the policy's already been floated that some form of subsidy to the purchase price. That's what's worked so well overseas, and you know, I think it needs to be introduced quickly, and you know, it doesn't have to be a huge amount of money, but right now there is a cost differential up front, and if the government really wants to see the numbers take off, that would be a great way to achieve it.
Yeah, and our little straw poll, you know, indicated that, you know, too expensive was the most, the main barrier. Nick?
Sorry, just to interrupt on that one. We do have to be a little bit careful. We did do some work on that, and if the EV you're looking at is $75,000 and the fee-based offer is $5,000, you know, is that going to hugely stimulate uptake? Or is the person who was going to pay $75,000 now just pocketing $5,000? So we have to be quite careful as to when we introduce the timing for this. They've got to be a little bit closer to price parity to actually stimulate uptake rather than just be a reward for those that can afford it anyway.
Yeah, that social equity thing. Very, very good point. Nick?
Look, and just on that one, my company's obviously position on that one was in support of obviously that policy. Personally, I don't think it bridges of enough gap to be actually of that material value, certainly at the used car value area. So it's a great initiative, but I don't think it bridges the gap nearly enough. So I'm more interested in actually having a proper emissions standard in New Zealand. I think that's a fantastic policy that we are very much lacking in New Zealand. I think you could use emissions as another mechanism to manage what type of emissions vehicles were being brought into the country and being sold. I think you can do that without creating market distortions too badly, but actually set a proper standard, you know, for that. And New Zealand would be a fantastic initiative that I think most parties would actually be okay with, depending whether you sit on the political spectrum. I think there needs to be fundamental reform to the way we tax. In this case, it's on fuel.
I'm not sure if it's you.
Sorry. And the other area is just fundamental shift on the use of tax. So it needs to really shift away from fuel onto road user charges, in my opinion, and actually use that as a mechanism potentially to drive, where you might give a much better incentive to those that are low emissions and tax those through a road user charge rather than the very inequitable use of a fuel tax, which we use now. It's all load into fuel. So I think tax reform on road from fuel onto road user charge and use that as a mechanism would be another nice and politically palatable way of achieving some good outcomes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate your time. It's time for us to wrap up this lunchtime. So again, thanks very much for joining. Thanks for all those questions. Sorry we couldn't answer all of your questions, but I hope those that were answered, you know, were useful to you, and that you've learned something that enables you to, you know, hopefully make your next car an EV. So again, many thanks to Richard, Nick and Steve for sharing their expertise. In terms of Sustainable Business Network, we run regular webinars and other events, so please take a look at our website if you're not already familiar with that. Keep an eye out for our next webinar events. Our next climate action event is at the end of September, 30th of September. So we'll be publicising that, and that will be focusing on energy use in buildings and how we can reduce the associated emissions. So that's about it. That's a wrap for today. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Thanks very much for joining, and stay safe. Cheers.